All right, so you know how much we love to go deep on these stories, and today is no exception. We're really going to unpack one that's got a lot of lessons for anyone, really, trying to kind of figure out this crazy world of business, especially in the fast-moving digital world.
Yeah, and I think the thing is everyone wants to, you know, get smart quickly and thoroughly right,
Mm-hmm.
but without feeling overwhelmed, like grounding in data.
Right, exactly.
Uh,
So let's dive right into a really fascinating story, and I'm going to say also a bit of a cautionary tale.
yeah, cautionary tale.
So we've been looking at this really interesting piece from Cognitive Market Research published just this past March 2025, and it offers this like really compelling look at a company that, well, was once a titan of the internet,
One of the giant.
Yahoo.
Yahoo. I mean, really, for many people, Yahoo was the internet.
It's true in its early days,
Yeah.
but now it's a very different picture.
Very different.
And so today, what we really want to do is understand why that happened. Like, what were the key strategic errors, the acquisition missteps that led to this decline of Yahoo? Because really, the goal here is to pull out those valuable lessons for any business operating in the digital space. Like, what can we learn from this story of Yahoo?
I think a good place to begin, the article really sort of spends a lot of time on Yahoo's history with acquisitions. And it's not that they stood still right. They actively acquired many companies. But the benefit that they hoped for often didn't materialize.
Okay, so like where do we even begin to kind of unpack this? I mean, I think one of the biggest what-ifs in tech history has got to be that back about 1998, the founders of this little company called Google wanted to sell
Right, for $1 million.
for $1 million, and Yahoo said no. So thinking back, what was like the prevailing wisdom at that time at Yahoo? I mean, what led them to that decision?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
Literally. I think, the article hints that at that time, the dominant model for internet companies was the portal. You go to one site and that site kind of gives you everything.
Right, like AOL.
Exactly like AOL.
Yeah.
And so I think in that context, these pure search engines might have seemed too narrow.
Right.
They didn't align with this idea of Yahoo being this all-encompassing hub. So in a sense, their own internal metrics probably prioritized keeping users engaged within their existing services, more so than this potential of just a standalone, incredibly efficient search function. And, it's a good reminder that even seemingly obvious opportunities can be missed if they don't fit the current strategic lens.
Totally. And I mean, it's hard to believe now, knowing how central Google's search engine became. It's like, how could you say no to that? And then fast forward to 2006, Yahoo buys Flickr, which at the time was this really promising photo sharing platform.
Really had a jump on things in terms of visual content.
Yeah. So what went wrong there? I mean, what does the research tell us?
Well, it seems like there were a couple of, I guess, key issues.
Okay.
The first one is that internally, there seemed to be this debate about Flickr's role.
Right.
So should it be a standalone social platform? Or should it be tightly integrated into Yahoo's existing services?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, and so this sort of internal conflict probably led to a diluted strategy, and a lack of decisive investment in key areas.
Right.
Then the second issue, and maybe this is more critical, is that Yahoo was really slow to recognize the shift to mobile photography. They didn't prioritize developing a really robust, easy-to-use mobile experience for Flickr. And that, of course, created an opening for platforms like Instagram to not just catch up, but leap ahead. Because Instagram was really mobile first from the beginning.
Right. So it's not enough to have a good product. It's about understanding like where the market is heading and adapting to those changes quickly. And then we have the 2013 acquisition of Tumblr for $1.1 billion. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, that seemed like a huge bet at the time.
It did. So why didn't that work out? What did the research tell us?
Well, it turns out that their content policies, the ones they had in place, really drove a lot of users away. That's what the article suggests.
Interesting.
And then beyond that, there just seemed to be a lack of clear direction for how Tumblr would fit into Yahoo's broader ecosystem.
Yeah.
It wasn't effectively integrated. It wasn't really given the resources or the strategic focus it needed to thrive. And so, the result, a significant write-down when Tumblr was later sold for a tiny fraction of that purchase price. It really does kind of underscore the point that a large acquisition is no guarantee of success. You need a clear vision.
Yeah.
And you need effective management after that acquisition.
Yeah. It almost feels like they kind of actively undermined the potential of these acquisitions.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is. And it wasn't just social platforms either. I mean, we can look at broadcast.com. That was a massive acquisition, $5.7 billion back in 1999. And it gave Yahoo this, like, really early stake in online streaming. I mean, it was revolutionary at the time. So what happened there? Why didn't Yahoo become the next Netflix or YouTube?
Well, this is another really interesting example of early foresight that just wasn't matched by the necessary investment or the strategic commitment.
Right.
Broadcast.com, at that time, had a huge early presence in online audio and video streaming. But it looks like Yahoo didn't invest enough in the infrastructure, the content that was needed to scale and compete as the technology kind of matured. Maybe they underestimated, I don't know, the bandwidth demands, the evolving consumer appetite for on-demand video. But that lack of sustained investment created a vacuum. And what happened? Other
Yeah.
players like YouTube and then, a little later Netflix were able to step in and dominate.
It's like having the winning lottery ticket and never cashing it in.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. So when we look at these specific instances, I mean, you've got Google, Flickr R, Tumblr, broadcast.com. What's kind of like the overarching lesson here about Yahoo's approach to these mergers and acquisitions?
Well, the article really kind of seems to point to this struggle to integrate and nurture the innovative potential of the companies they acquired.
Right.
So they either missed these truly transformative technologies early on, or they fumbled the execution even after making these significant investments. And it really just makes you kind of wonder about their due diligence process, their integration strategies, and their long-term vision, right?
Yeah.
How would these acquisitions actually fit into their overall business model?
Right. It's almost a case study in how, even with tons of resources, that lack of strategic clarity can just be devastating. I mean, the article doesn't just focus on acquisitions, does it? There are some other strategic blunders in there that weren't just about buying other companies.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about those.
Well, one of the most significant, and the article kind of rightly calls it a pivotal moment, was that rejection of Microsoft's buyout offer. It was 2008, and Microsoft offered $44.6 billion.
Whoa. $44.6 billion.
It's an enormous figure.
That's huge. I mean, the article frames this as a consequence of short-sightedness on Yahoo's part. So, thinking about that context at the time, what do you think might have been their internal rationale? Like, why turn down so much money?
It's tough to say for sure. I mean, the article doesn't really get into the specifics of their internal debates, but I think we can kind of infer some things, right? I mean, Yahoo's leadership probably believed that the company was undervalued and that they had, this huge potential to grow independently. Maybe they were concerned about things like culturally fit or losing control.
Right, right.
But in hindsight, the article's assessment of this being a moment of short-sightedness, yeah, it does seem accurate. After they rejected the offer, Yahoo's market value went down considerably, and they never really regained that same level of, influence or financial strength. So it really shows how important it is to objectively assess where your company stands in a market that's changing so rapidly, and to know when potentially a good exit has been presented to you.
It really does feel like a fork in the road moment, and they kind of chose the wrong path.
Definitely a turning point.
Yeah. And then you've got another critical failure that the article brings up, which is this really slow response to the rise of mobile technology.
I mean, this is a classic case of a company that got anchored to their past success. Yahoo was so dominant in the desktop internet era, and when things started moving to smartphones, they were slow to adapt their services,
Right.
to create those mobile-first offerings. And they kept prioritizing those desktop-based products while their competitors, Google, Facebook, they were aggressively going after mobile.
And you could see the impact of that in user behavior, right? I mean, as people started using smartphones more, spending more time on those devices, their engagement with Yahoo, it just probably naturally waned as people gravitated towards platforms that, had mobile at their core.
Yeah, they weren't meeting users where they were increasingly spending their digital time.
Exactly. And then finally, the article talks about how Yahoo had so many changes in leadership. I mean, between 2007 and 2017, there was just constant turnover at the CEO level. So how do you think that kind of instability impacted their overall strategy?
Oh, it's got to be so hard to maintain any consistent strategy with that kind of churn at the top.
Yeah.
Every new CEO is going to bring their own vision. And that probably led to, shifts in priorities. One CEO comes in and says, okay, we're going to focus on this. The next one comes in and says, nope, scratch that. We're doing this. Initiatives get abandoned, and there's just an overall lack of long-term focus. The article does mention, though, that when Marissa Mayer took over in 2012, she tried to revitalize the company. She made acquisitions and, had tried different things. But without a unified, consistent strategy, those efforts were just probably hampered from the start. And again, it highlights that strong and stable leadership is absolutely crucial to navigating a really complex market and to driving long-term growth.
Right. So we've talked about mishandled acquisitions, the Microsoft deal that didn't happen, the slow adoption of mobile, the leadership instability. What are the key takeaways here? Like, what should businesses really be paying attention to?
I think this is where Yahoo's story becomes a valuable learning experience for everyone. The first thing is that continuous innovation and the ability to adapt quickly to changes in the market, that's essential. It's the most essential thing. Yahoo had so many opportunities to be a leader, but just didn't act decisively.
And the digital landscape is unforgiving, right? If you're
Mhm.
not moving forward, you're falling behind.
Absolutely. Complacency is fatal. Even when you're a market leader, you've got to be looking ahead, anticipating those changes, and willing to kind of disrupt your own business before someone else does it for you.
Right. And the second thing the article makes clear is that acquisitions, they're not just about buying companies. You have to have a plan for how you're going to integrate them, how you're going to make money from them, and how they fit into your overall goals. And, Yahoo's track record, it just shows how much potential can be wasted with poorly managed acquisitions.
Due diligence is so important. And it's got to go way beyond just the financials. It's about cultural fit, the tech synergies, and having a well-defined strategy for how that acquired company will contribute to your long-term goals.
And the third point, I think, is a strong and consistent vision, driven by stable leadership, that can't be overstated. I mean, all those changes at the top, that revolving door in the CEO's office, that definitely contributed to Yahoo's downfall.
Totally. A clear vision gives everyone a roadmap. It guides those investment decisions, how you develop products, and your overall direction. And leadership stability builds a strong culture, and it helps everyone stay focused on those long-term goals.
And the last point I'll make is that you have to be aware of how people are using technology, and particularly this huge shift to mobile.
Right, and Yahoo just didn't adapt fast enough to that.
Yeah, it's a really stark reminder that businesses have to understand how their customers are using technology and make sure their products and services are optimized for those platforms. Ignoring a major shift like that, well, that's a recipe for decline. And it's clear that the rise of mobile, it wasn't just a trend, it was this huge shift. And Yahoo's failure to embrace it, that was one of the biggest reasons for their decline.
Yeah.
And the article actually includes this fast fact that really shows just how much Yahoo declined.
It's kind of mind-blowing. So in 2016, Verizon bought Yahoo's core internet business, right? But they bought it for just $4.8 billion.
4.8 billion for a company that at its peak in 2000 was valued at $125 billion.
I know, it's crazy. That drop, that shows you just how massive Yahoo's missed opportunities were.
Right. And it really marks the end of Yahoo as this independent, giant of the internet.
It really just shows you how quickly things can change in the tech world.
Hmm.
You have to stay agile, innovative, and focused on your strategy. Otherwise, well, you know it can happen.
So to wrap it all up, Yahoo's story, the one that's laid out in this cognitive market research piece, it's a powerful lesson in what not to do in the digital world. Failure to innovate, adapt, make smart acquisitions, keep a consistent vision, and embrace new technologies that all led to their downfall.
And this brings us to the big question for everyone listening. So thinking about all this, the missed opportunities, the strategic blunders, what companies today, what tech companies might be at risk if they don't learn from this. Like, think about the long-term consequences of not adapting to new technologies, of not making the right acquisitions, of not having a clear vision.
Yeah,
It's something to really think about.
it is.
There's a lot to learn from this story.
There is. All right. Well, that's our deep dive for today. Until next time.